Sally Ben, Coran, and Lou Aaron grew up in this house, and the neighborhood just hasn't been the same since they left. We're going to see if a couple of the oldest surviving things from the King Ranch are here. Daddy might be hunting, but we'll go see. Well, this is the backyard. Let's see if we can find him out here. Well, he's home. Great. Let's go talk to him. Hi, Daddy.
Good morning. Well, we're here this morning to get ready to go to the Raymondville Historical Museum, where we will be seeing a lot of artifacts and memorabilia from the King Ranch and that section of the country during the settlement of Texas back in the early 1800s. And we will be showing you animals and people's tools and their mode of transportation and their saddles and things that people had to make a home with during that time, and they were not modern facilities for sure. So we will, I wanted to tell you a little about some of the people who settled this country, that some of them that I knew their descendants, but of course I didn't know them. I'm getting up in years and probably the only thing from the King Ranch that isn't already in a museum, but I'm working on it. So I'll get my notes here and we'll go down the list. And tell you about some of the people who were here at that time. This will not be a cross-country Charles Perrault story, but we'll do our best. First, let me tell you about the conditions of this country in those days. It was a very rugged, violent place to live, and the settlers who came here were constantly in panic because of the bandits from across the river, and also the thieves and the robbers who lived on this side. And the only law in this part of the country was the Texas Rangers. And they, of course, were very rugged, tough people, and they had to be. The story goes that the only way a ranger grew to be an old man was that he shot first and then asked questions. And that was really what happened, and about the only way that they could live and get by. But and of course, there was a lot of abuse of this in this time. The bandits would come over in groups and raid these little ranches and homes and steal their cattle, and so when the Rangers caught up with them, they just shot them right there on the spot and brought the cattle home. And of course, there were a lot of people who got caught at the wrong place at the wrong time, and they were killed too, and that, of course, was bad. There was a lot of abuse on both sides. And this continued to get worse even after the Civil War. There was a time when there were over 1,000 Texas Rangers in this area trying to keep order, and there was no way they could do it, and the federal government shipped in over 100,000 troops to maintain order in this country in the early 1900s. When Mummy and I got married, and and moved to Fair Park Drive here in Harlingen in 1933, I believe. We lived in a house, and our next door neighbor was Mr. Waterwall. I know you all have heard about Mr. Waterwall. Well, he was not a ranger, but he was a driver for Mr. Hill and Mr. A.Y. Baker, who were rangers. And the stories that he would tell would make the hair come up on the back of your neck, and they were true stories. So many of these raids, the rangers would they'd shoot these outlaws and either hang them in the trees or maybe bring them into the towns and hang them on the main square as a warning. Of course, this was a horrible thing to do, but those were tough times. So into this story, I want to tell you about some of the people who originated King Ranch. Mifflin Kennedy was a man who came to Corpus Christi in the early 1800s, and he was a sailor, and he sailed all over the several parts of the world, and he loved it, and he wanted to get into the riverboat business. So he worked as a pilot on a riverboat in the Mississippi River for some time, and then he heard about the river boat business in Florida. So he took a trip down there, and there he met Captain Richard King, who was a pilot of one of the riverboats in Florida, and they became close friends. And he came back and was operating this boat on the Mississippi when he met Major Saunders, who was a U.S. Army engineer. And Major Saunders hired Mifflin Kennedy to help him secure a fleet of riverboats for the Rio Grande River. And they did, and the reason for this was this was during the Texas-Mexican War, and General Taylor was here, and they needed to transport goods and ammunition and people up the river to Camargo, which is across the river from Rio Grande City. That's how far he operated boats, but the Rio Grande was navigable up as far as far west Texas. And so they secured 6 boats, and Captain Kennedy, came down and operated one of the boats and ran the operation. And he got in touch with his friend Richard King in Florida and got him to come up here. And they operated boats for the Army during that time. And this was in 1847 when King joined Kennedy. And they operated boats there for several years. And then later, during the Civil War, they also operated boats. But an interesting thing happened in Brownsville. I'll tell you about the wives of Kennedy and King. Captain King was at the boat dock in Brownsville one day, and he was cursing and yelling at the people to get those things on board and raising Cain, and this young lady drove by in her buggy and heard him, and she stopped her buggy and tied her horse to a post and went down and gave him a good dressing down for using that language and for being so harsh with his helpers. Well, in a few months, Henrietta Chamberlain married Captain King, and they lived together for many years, and they had one daughter who they named Alice Gertrude. And Mrs. King was a very unusual lady. She was a very proud woman. She was like the old cowboy that rode for the brand. This was her life, the King Ranch brand and the King Ranch itself. She was very proud and jealous of the name and all, and she designed the fence that goes around the King Ranch even today, and patented the patented the wire, and no one else could buy that wire but the King Ranch. That was for 2 or 3 different reasons. One was to keep the cattle in, and the other was to let people know that when they came to that fence, don't cross it, because they didn't like people crossing that property. And we will be seeing a gate on the Alice Brownsville stagecoach road, which ran from Brownsville to Alice. And even though it was a public transportation, there was a gate at the King Ranch fence, and someone had to let that coach go through and then close the gate behind it. This was how rigid they were in people getting on their range. This stagecoach road operated for several years, and I remember when Evan Hurst and I were hunting on the King Ranch, one day while Evan and I were driving up there, in the indentation of this old stagecoach road was still in the sand, and with the brush was all around it. And I saw this post sticking up out of the sand, and it was a telephone post. They were about 100 feet apart, and there were 2 of them, and I sawed it off and brought this one home, and I have another one in the garage. There were 2 lines on this, telephone lines on this post, and of course the insulators were all gone. But this is a very old, very valuable piece of artifact. Going back to Mrs. King, how unusual she was. She designed and wrote the plan for the Santa Gertrudis Ranch House, which is outside of Kingsville, still there today. And on the top of this, and it was on a rise in the ground, and they cleared all the brush for about a half a mile around it. The reason being was there were a lot of bandits that raided these places, and she designed and had them build a lookout on the top of this house, and it's still there today with the porthole course, people shoot through to run off the bandits when they came. Also, another thing that was unusual about her, up until her death, no one in the Santa Gertrudis ranch house used tobacco, alcohol, and there was no cursing. And the story goes that that's the reason Captain King stayed away from home so much. Captain Kennedy's wife was named Petra, and I was unable to find any information on her. She was more of a, I guess, a homebody that stayed at home and raised a family and didn't have much publicity. But she was a very pretty woman, small. Her name was Petra Vela when they got married, but there's not much information on her. Well, going back to the partnership, boat partnership, after several years of operation, there was rumors of railroads coming to the valley. And of course, Captain King and Captain Kennedy knew that when the railroads came, that would kill the boat business. So they dissolved the boat partnership, sold their boats, and started and opened a partnership operation of buying land and investing. And they bought land from Sinton, Texas, to the Rio Grande River on the west and to the Arroyo on the east. And all of that land belonged to, and they called it the King Ranch, and this is the original King Ranch. And this land was claimed by Spain and Mexico and Texas and the United States when they started buying land. And sometimes when they got their title, they couldn't get clear title because the land actually belonged to another country, so they had to pay twice in some instances to get their land, but they got it. And this partnership went on for several years, and in 1867, they dissolved the partnership. And Captain Kennedy kept the north part of the ranch, and Captain King kept the south part. And most of the things that you see today came from the Kennedy part, the north part of the ranch. When Captain King died, he died in the Mango Hotel in San Antonio in 1885. And he left his wife, Henrietta, 500,000-acre ranch and a $500,000 debt. And she hired Robert Justin Kleberg to run the ranch for him. And he was an attorney. And he married Alice Gertrude and ran the ranch, and in 10 years, from the time he took over until 1886, he not only paid all of the debt, but he added to the ranch many new purchases, and at the end of 1886, the ranch was 650,000 acres. And from then on, for years and as years went by, of course, the children and all and the heirs began to, the division of the King Ranch began to take place, and from there on it belonged to many different people. But the main King Ranch today is still run by a board of directors, and they have over 900,000 acres still in the ranch, and it's in Texas and Brazil and several different places. But it's still in operation, the biggest in the world, and always has been. Well, going back to the riverboat, one of the interesting stories was that during the Civil War, they still operated these boats. They had 22 boats then, and they were hauling merchandise, supplies and so forth, to Camargo, for both sides, the Federal and the Confederate. So the United States Navy blockaded the mouth of the river. So being guys who had it up here, they registered their boats under the Mexican flag, which was a neutral country, and operated up and down the river and carried supplies and stuff for both sides. So they were not done. And neither side could attack them because they had the Mexican flag. Well, there were several different attempts to bring railroads into the valley. And credit goes to a man by the name of Uriah Lott, who was from Pennsylvania, I believe. He moved to Corpus, and he was a good businessman. And he organized the committee or group of people or directors to build railroads to the valley. And they started at Fenton in 1903. And they would build a few miles of railroad to the south, and wherever a station should be, or a crossroads, or a place, they would drive a stake and name the town. And Mr. Lott named all of the towns. He and a friend of his named all of the towns from Fenton to Brownsville. And they named them, of course, for people who they knew and their friends and acquaintances. And the railroad reached Raymondville in 1904. And they drove a stake and named the town Raymondville for a manager of the El South Division of the King Ranch. This is the ranch that you all used to hunt on. And he was, one of the accounts says his initials was DC and another one was EB, but at any rate his name was Raymond, and this town, Raymondville, was named for him. So that's about all of the preview that we can do, and we will be leaving shortly to go to the historical site and see all of these goodies.
As you can see, we've made it to the museum in Raymondville. It's housed in the schoolhouse, former schoolhouse. When was this built, Daddy?
1924.
1924. Whoops, I want to go backwards. There. Okay.
This is Mifflin Kennedy on the left and his wife Petra. And one of their sons is John G. And I can't read the...
Marie Stella.
She's
Is
the
it Turcott?
John G. Kennedy.
wife,
Daughter-in-law.
daughter-in-law. Okay. This is an anchor from one of the river boats that we will be talking about that plied the Rio Grande from the mouth of the river to Camargo. And now we will go into the Kennedy room. On the left here is the hand-carved post for the Kennedy mansion that was built in Corpus Christi and was demolished, and the Catholic Cathedral is now built on that site. And this staircase was one of the staircases to the Kennedy mansion there in Corpus, and it also is hand-carved. And this goes on around to a balcony. This is one of the first pianos that was in Raymondville. And over in the northwest corner here is what they call the rental room divider that went into another part of the house. And this is the bed of Mrs. Mifflin Kennedy. And then there's the potties by the bed that you might want to check. And here's a little portable organ over here that was in her room. And these, if you can come a little closer here, is an old, this was the first piano that was brought to Raymondville. It was in an old hotel here in 1908. That's an interesting piece.
I have a copy of that Twin Cities at home that's sitting on the piano that you gave me.
Okay, now we can go on to the right and see a door into the kitchen. We will start here at on the left to show you some of the old chairs and the couches that were in those days. Some of the rugs, wild animal rugs that were in the home. This is the kitchen cabinet. The lighting may be bad for that because you're facing a light. But going on to the right, you'll see the old coffee mill and the jugs and the cream containers and the jars that people canned fruits and vegetables in those days. And this is another kitchen cabinet over to the right, and the dining table with 4 chairs. Here is the old cook stove in the corner, and the copper pot held the wood for the stove. This is what they brought the wood in. And then on the east wall, you will notice that the grinding irons for the different brands, from coyote hides. And these are Mrs. Kennedy's last boots. And here are some of her shoes with her fan. And over on the right side of the top of the showcase is the old kerosene lamp that all of us used. Continuing on to the right, this is a portion of a typical school that the people had at the division headquarters at each King Ranch division. And this school, they had their own schoolhouses for their own people. And the grades were from 1 through 7. And all of the children that were born on the King Ranch got their reading and writing and arithmetic basics right here in a school like this. And you will notice in the far corner, you will notice the outdoor John.
You want to go demonstrate?
That's one at a time. And the catalog. The catalog was added later, though, because they didn't have catalogs. No, that was before Sears. But this is a typical wood stove that heated the schoolroom, and you got a shot of the blackboard, didn't you? Okay, now we will proceed to another room. This is the first mural that was in a drugstore in Raymondville in about 8 or 9. And going on, this is the anchor from one of the 3 ships, Spanish ship that was wrecked off of Padre Island during a storm. And this was in 1524. So it's kind of an old piece of iron. I think the next thing that would be interesting would be this, and I'm not sure what it is. It's a spinning wheel. This was a thread, and I don't know how it worked, but that was a spinning wheel. And there's some snowshoes, but I don't think they came from Rio Grande Valley.
That's just in case it ever snows here. We're prepared.
So that's about it. The main attraction here to me is this old anchor. This is a replica of the beach after a storm back in those days, and shows the sand dunes and the growth that was there, and some of the birds. Here's a curlew that's standing here by the sand dune. The coconuts that washed on the beach. The shorebirds that are over next to the water. And it looks just like a sand dune that we all have seen. Let me see, just a minute. This came from the Canelo Ranch. The wind turned the wheel and generated electricity, see, into the battery. That's where they charge the battery. Now this is is an old wash pot. And when I was one of my first memories was the wash pot. I mean, it was the center of attraction. Because Mama, it sat out in the yard and on some rocks, and they built a fire in it to boil it was much larger than this one. But it was used every Saturday to boil the clothes for washing. And then Mama made soap in it. In hog killing time, they boiled the water there to scald the hogs. And then after they dressed the hogs, this is where they rendered the lard and made cracklings for crackling bread. So this was one of the main items in a home. I'm not sure what this is here, but here's some old milk cans that were used. This is a cream separator. I don't know whether anybody ever heard of one of these, but we didn't have one, but I remember them. They pour the milk in here and turn it, and it would separate the cream on one side and the milk on the other. And of course, here is back in I believe it was 1942, that Hygiea started with their milk routes. And that milk route meant that that's where they picked up the milk from all of the different farms. They'd pick it up every morning and leave a clean milk can for the next morning. And they'd take that can into the plant and process the milk. And this was a creamer. They put the cream in here. The farmer had a separator. He'd separate the cream, put the milk. They gave them the skim milk to the hogs. Nobody would drink that stuff. But the cream went to the dairy for making butter. I found this creamer in the Conley Ranch barn. It was covered in sand, and it was a 1959 version of the milk route. They discontinued this in about 1962. But I cleaned it up and painted it, and Coran painted the logo, which is a real nice can. That's quite an artifact. Okay, going on to the left is all of this machinery that you see was drawn by horses or mules. Here is a mower. This is what they mowed with, hay mower, and for the grass.
You better talk louder. Talk loud.
This old tractor was on the Mahalik Ranch in 1920. That was the old iron wheels, and it also had a flywheel on here with a belt that operated different machinery at the barns where they were working on different plows and things where they had to have power tools. This was the power. And it was hand cranked. There was no battery. Coming on around here to the northwest corner, these are corner fence posts that were used in the corrals and a typical corral. I made from heavy timber. And the plows and all of the different tools and machinery for farming. All of these are here in this corner. The braking plow, you can see what a tremendous plow that is. This was a fire plow, where they plowed, in case of fires, they would plow fire breaks. This is a one-row cultivator over here with the tongue. They had a horse on each side, and this would plow their cotton or whatever they were raising. Here to the next is the old sugar mill. Now we had one of these when I lived in Alabama, and you put the cane in here, and this makes the juice out of it, and it ran down into a trough that went to the kettle where they boiled the molasses and made my homemade molasses. On to the right is the fence and gate of the stagecoach road from Brownsville to Alice that I mentioned earlier. This was the gate that went into the King Ranch. And even though the stagecoach was public transportation, they had the King Ranch maintained a man there to open the gate and let it through and close it because they didn't want anybody on the ranch uninvited. This old cart here, I remember them all of my life. There were all of the depots. That was an old Wells Fargo American Express cart that they unloaded the merchandise from the trains onto this and then rolled it out where they could put it in the different wagons. Going on around to the right, you can see the different planters. These planters were, they put the cotton or the grain or whatever in here and pulled it with a horse, and the machinery dropped the seed into a furrow that this disc made, and then the other disc covered it up. Here is a single one-row planter. This is a two-row. This is a one-row planter. We had one of these in Alabama. I remember it. This is something else. We planted peanuts with it. And here's the original insecticide duster for that area, for that era. They put the sulfur in there and pull it, and it would whirl and blow the sulfur out to kill the insects. Here's an old wagon that was used to carry saddles and equipment everywhere that people went, and particularly in the ranch country where they went from camp to camp for roundup purposes to catch and have all of the cattle checked, and they would take along this chuck wagon. Here's an old chuck wagon with the iron tires that was used not only on the ranch but on all the cattle drives that were. This is a typical chuck wagon. The end gate here was let down, and this is where the cook did all the work, and he put all of his supplies in there and on the back. And when they went to a different location, they stopped the chuck wagon, and there the cook fed all of the people. The coffee pot here that I was mentioning to you, this is where I learned about this was in the King Ranch, and the cowboys were always, there were always 2 or 3 of these on the stove, on the coals, and they were full of coffee, and they cooked the sugar into the coffee. and it was real good, and they came in for their coffee on their breaks. Here is a Dutch oven that they cooked the pan de campo, camp bread in. They made that bread and put it in there and put the coals on the top as well as the bottom, and they baked it. Over here is one of the modern forge. This is where they heated all of the in making horseshoes and anything that the iron needed to be shaped. This is where it was. They put the coals in there, and this was the forge that blew the air and heated it to red hot. Coming on around, here is an old pot-bellied stove that was seen in all of the depots and public buildings. This was the heating system for all public buildings. Going on around to your right, this is the first safe in Raymondville. It was used by a lumber company and hardware at first, and then was transferred to the Raymondville State Bank in 1907. And that's where they kept all the money in Willacy County. Here's the old printing press that I don't know how it worked. They put the ink on there, and then the paper here, and it pressed on it, and that was the printing of the paper. Most of this here is the things that they used at the homes, old irons and bits that were in the bridle. Here's something I don't know what it is myself. Oh, this.
Okay, it's going.
Okay. This is an old World War II that carried the cannons. So we won't, World War I, excuse me. Coming on around, here's another wagon that they carried their supplies and everything. Mercantile wagon, carried everything. Here is an interesting buggy. This was the buggy that they've custom made for the Kennedys. And you'll notice the wide tires because of the sand. And also the shield is a shield here to keep the sand from getting into the axle. And then of course this was horse drawn. That's a real interesting old buggy, and it was custom made. These are working saddles from the Kennedy Ranch. Here's a buggy that belonged to Dr. Brown that he made all of his rounds in during that period. This is when house calls were being made. Here's a buggy from the McAllen Ranch that we use for transportation to town to go to Sunday school. And oh, you might want to look at the nail guy on the far left. This was the nail guy that I donated. And I think that's about all for this room here, except here's a picture of the old Paso Real that was on the stagecoach on the Arroyo that it has been rebuilt and is in the museum in Harlingen now. The animal room, and it was dedicated to the Durham family. You all remember Bland Durham. And this mannequin or picture here is Eddie exactly like him. I met him at one time. Coming on around, you will see the different animals on the left. The red-tailed hawk, the horned owls on the tree, the mountain lions, the goose, the water birds. Coming on around is the bobcat with the bird in his mouth. The different birds that you see in the trees, the javelina, the two javelina. Here is a hawk. Going on around, you see the turkey. That's the turkey that's the gobbler that I shot and gave to the museum, and they had it mounted. And then coming on around, the mounted deer, the different hawks in the trees, another bobcat. Coming on down this way, here is a rattlesnake over here by the coyote. And coming on around here, I don't know what type of snake this is. I'm not familiar with it. But here are the quail that we have so many of in the range country. And the armadillo. And another coyote. And this is the badger. So you don't see any of these anymore. This is a badger. And here's another horned owl up on the wall, and some beautiful deer heads. This is some foreign animals, but these are rifles that were used by the Texas Rangers and the ranch people for hunting and for protection of their property. This is typical old Maytag that never needed repairing. And the ringer, the old cook stoves, 6-burner stoves. These are the more modern stoves, gas stoves. Here is the kitchen pump. They had a well in all the kitchens in those days, and they had a pump in it so they could pump water for the kitchen area. Here's a sausage stuffer. They put the meat in here, you know, and put that's when they stuffed the sausage in the intestines. Put the intestine there and mash it down and fill the thing with, here's an old scrub board and an old churn. I used to have to churn, and I loved it. These are the old water heaters that were used in those days. You build a fire in and heat the water.
We're driving into this Connie Ranch that Daddy spends so much time in. Okay. Yeah.
Get out and walk up there to the fence, and you can. We're now going to see another museum that was put together by me and Don Wilson. And all of these things that you see here, we found them down at the Connolly barn that were in awful bad shape, and took them home and refinished all of them, and took the rust off, and you'll see some very unusual items here. And we don't charge any admission for this.
Okay.
Over here is our fireplace where we keep the beans and food warm. And you might want to get a close-up of these. These are tools that were used in the early settler days. There's the old claw hammer, double-bitted axe, and the old square, the level. And this saw, that was used for 2 or 3 different things. It was an ice saw, and also a crosscut saw for wood, but they used it for ice mostly. This was when they made ice in the 300-pound blocks, and they sawed them, you know, in 50-pound or 25 or whatever you wanted, and for sale. So this is a very unusual corner here. Going over to the left, here's the law office sign that was in Carl's office for several years. And going further to the right, you will see the harness, horse collars, and the hams that were used for plowing. Immediately below there is the breast yoke. This was hung onto the hams on each side, and this was tied to the tongue of the wagon or cultivator or whatever it was used. And these are the single trees that were on the plow or the cultivator that put trace chains on, and then they pulled against these harnesses on the collars to pull the vehicle. Here's an old stirrup that we found. This is a cow, we call them cow kickers. It was a thing that was used when you were milking the cows. A cow always kicks forwards instead of backwards. So what you did, you put this cow kicker in the front of the legs, the hind legs, and hooked this on its hocks back here so it couldn't kick the milk bucket over. They don't make those anymore. Here's some horseshoes that we found. There's no telling how old they are. Here is the coyote traps that the farmers and ranchers used to catch coyotes. This is another cow catcher. Here's an old brand that even the Conleys don't know whose brand it was that we found. It could be a 4, it could be a 7 bar, it could be several different things. So that's about the extent of our antiques, except you've seen all the old drills and plows that we brought up here, and planters that we found in the brush and painted them. This is a replica of an old well that was used on every farm and ranch that drew the water, and with buckets down in the well. And then this bucket was didn't have to have to pull the water up. They pumped it up. And it was primed. You had to prime the pump each time that you got water, and you always kept a bucket of water there so you could pour it in there and prime the pump. I think that's about all of the things that we have to show you up here. I have two things that I wanted to mention to you about Henrietta King. One of the things that I forgot to mention about Henrietta King, she was the daughter of a Presbyterian minister in Brownsville who started the first Protestant church in Brownsville. And the other man that I wanted to talk about was Mr. Waterwall. I failed to tell you he was our neighbor, you remember. He was an old, wrinkled fellow that weighed about 90 pounds, and real rugged. And he smoked Lobo Negra tobacco. This was a Mexico product. And instead of the papers that they rolled them in, they had corn shucks. There was a number of corn shucks cut to the size of a cigarette paper that were attached to each stack of the Lobo Negra tobacco, and he would roll this tobacco in this shuck, and if, of course, you couldn't lick it like you did the paper to keep it stuck, and you had to hold it. And he would bend up the front end of the cigarette to keep the tobacco from spilling out and light it, and he would have to hold the cigarette all while he was smoking it, because he couldn't put it down, it would fall apart, so he had to hold it until the fire began to burn his fingers, and then he'd throw it away. So this is about all we have to show you on this story. We'll give you another tour when I get to be about 100.
Just wanted to make sure I had a picture of the gate into this ranch El Chapote, where Granddaddy has spent so much time and energy. It's a lot of fun to come down here. About the bees?
Oh, the bees were right the other side of the trailers there, and the car was parked about where the big log is. And that's where I outran Don to the car. And we
What kind of bees were they?
Huh?
What kind of bees were they?
Killer bees.
Killer bees. All right.
This is the hunting stand that you girls gave me. And I've killed several deer out of it, and a turkey maybe. It's still in good shape. Got a good chair in it. And it's also a good place for the aliens to spend the night. But it is a real nice stand. I sure do thank you.
Is this where Corinne couldn't? You had to help her get her jacket on, or she couldn't get her jacket on?
No. That was any stand that you mentioned. That would be something wrong with.
Some story.
This is the one that I fell out of with a can of corn and landed in this deep sand and didn't spill any corn. Okay.
Jason, you're going to be in trouble this time. Going, but that's what Jason's supposed to do. Okay.
I look at it and everybody else is like,
by 4. to go for the 3. And all right, you're right, you did it. We'll pretend that was one of his 3s. And that was his other one.
Behind you, behind you.
Yo creo que las pompas es algo muy importante, ¿no? Tanto para los hombres como para las mujeres, mantenerlas duritas o en buena forma, aumentar. Estas sí pueden aumentar solas con las puras pesas. Como no traje mis pesas, también en su casa pueden hacerlo con unas botellas, las llenan de agua y todo eso, o con unos libros o qué sé yo, ¿no? Entonces vamos a hacer unos desplantes, que es aquí así, levantar la espalda recta, lo más recta que se pueda. Entonces baja uno así, hasta abajo, y sube, y aquí estamos trabajando toda la parte de la pompa.
El movimiento de la cadera.
Así. Y este ejercicio es buenísimo. Primero lo hacemos con una pierna y luego podemos hacer con la otra pierna. Y esto nos va a dar dureza de la pompa. Mientras más peso le metamos, obviamente más volumen nos va a dar en la pompa. Entonces lo bueno de las pesas, de que tú puedes hacer tu cuerpo como tú quieras. O sea, si tú tienes mucha pompa y tú la quieres bajar, entonces haces mucha repetición con poquito peso. Pon tú, estas botellas pesan poquito para mí, ¿no? Entonces haces mucha repetición, poco peso, te baja la pompa.
¿Cuánto?
Haces poca repetición o mediana repetición con mucho peso, vas a aumentar. Y esto obviamente vas a endurecer, ¿no?
Eso está muy bueno el detalle, que no hace falta hacer mucho peso, sino lo que quiere es ponerse firme.
Depende de lo que quieras. Yo, por
rebajar.
ejemplo, digo, a mí no me gusta tener unos músculos así grandísimos ni nada de esto, sino normal, porque la tele nos aumenta como 5 kilos. Entonces simplemente hago un peso mediano, repeticiones medianas.
Tú dices bastantes repeticiones en sets, por ejemplo, ¿cuántas repeticiones habría que hacer de ese ejercicio?
Por eso depende de lo que quieras. Por ejemplo, ¿tú qué quisieras? ¿Bajar o subir?
Obviamente, rebajar, rebajar.
Rebajar, pon tú, haces unas 6 series de 20 repeticiones con cada pierna, con poco peso, pon tú.